Should prisoners like the Boston Marathon bomber have the right to vote while serving their sentence? Democratic presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders says yes. And he raised some eyebrows when he argued his point at last night's CNN town hall.
If somebody commits a serious crime, sexual assault, murder, they're going to be punished. They may be in jail for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, their whole lives. That's what happens when you commit a serious crime. But I think the right to vote is inherent to our democracy. Yes, even for terrible people. Because once you start chipping away and you say, well, that guy committed a terrible crime, not going to let him vote. Or that person did that, not going to let that person vote. You're running down a slippery slope.
After he said that, the reaction from his 2020 contenders was mixed.
I agree that the right to vote is one of the very important components of citizenship. I think we should have that conversation.
Part of the punishment when you were convicted of a crime and you're incarcerated is you lose certain rights. You lose your freedom. And I think during that period, it does not make sense to have an exception for the right to vote.
Bakari Sellers is an attorney and CNN commentator, and Desmond Meade is the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And Desmond was just in the Time 100 list for leading the effort to restore voting rights to felons in Florida. And so welcome to both of you. And Desmond, let me start with you. You know, you have this felon record. You have paid your debts to society. You can now vote. So do you think inmates, same question to you, should be able to vote?
Well, I think that the question might be shaped a little wrong. I think the question should be, should American citizens ever lose their citizenship because of mistakes that they've made, right? And
What's
then when we
the answer to
think
that?
about it in that context, the answer is no, they shouldn't lose their citizenship. You know, I have 4 young sons, you know, who every now and then they might make foolish mistakes, but they never stop being a me. They never stop being my son. Nothing speaks more to American citizenship than being able to vote. And so
If
when
you are a convicted murderer or a rapist or a sex offender, no matter what, you're saying they should be able to vote.
If they're an American citizen, they should be able to vote. But see, I want to be able to address that in a different context, because what we heard at the town hall was in the context of politicians and they're engaging in their little sound bites. The concern that I have is whether or not any of those candidates have really had real conversations with directly impacted people. People like me, we have people in Louisiana, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, in California, returning citizens that's been leading this effort for many years. What's very important is that any one of these candidates that's trying to get to the White House, they must have a conversation with people like us to really get a better and deeper context of this debate and in the larger picture of criminal justice.
Sure, and when you made the point about speaking in sound bites last night, I heard Bakari's, chuckle, and I want to talk about, what we heard from them in a second. But Bakari, just on the question in and of itself, on its face, what do you think? Should inmates, or as Desmond prefers, American citizens behind bars, be allowed to vote?
Well, the answer to that question is no, and I don't believe that the Dylan Roofs of the world or the Boston Bombers of the world should have the right to vote. But even before we get to that point, because there is one small caveat that I'm sure Desmond and I can agree on, because he's been doing great work, we have to applaud the work that he has been doing and other returning citizens have been doing, because I think what they're doing is actually the goal that every candidate should get to, which is if you are in this country and you are off your papers, which means you are off parole or you are off probation and you have served your time, then your right to vote must be reestablished immediately. And those returning citizens deserve the right to vote immediately. Those individuals who are incarcerated right now who are serving their time, the answer to that question is no. But the individuals who have served their time in states throughout the country, in fact, Florida has now caught up to South Carolina, allowing returning citizens the right to vote. I think every single state in the union should have that standard, because you should not be punished for the rest of your life because of a mistake that you made. I do agree with that.
Bakari, but we're still behind Maine and Vermont, which, they have their people never lose the right to vote. And then there's several states that allow people to vote even while they're on probation. You know, and so I think that
Well, I think that's a debate that we can have. I think that allowing someone to vote while they may be on probation or may be on parole, while some of these rights are being granted, is fine. I think that we can actually find that middle ground. I think that's what Senator Harris was talking about. But I just have a hard time saying that someone like Dylan Roof has the right to vote. And I know that people will say that that's a sensationalized argument. That's the worst of the worst. Well, where do we draw that line? And I think that is my problem. That's my heartburn.
Because I think that's a great point. But we cannot engage in picking and choosing who is worthy of being able to vote and who is not worthy of being able to vote. Because when we get there, I mean, that line could be drawn in so many different ways from so many different people. You know, and just like when you engage in the topic of violent versus nonviolent, at the end of the day, people that we're talking about is people, and we have to be in uncomfortable positions and understand that our protection of rights that are afforded to people like Dylan Roof is important for our own protection. Because the minute that we erode those protections for the worst among us, all of us are vulnerable.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree that this is the discussion that we should have. And this discussion, with all due respect to Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris, who I love and support, and even Amy Klobuchar and the rest, they don't need to be leading this discussion. It's people like Desmond who are actually doing the work on the street that need to be leading this discussion. And this is one that should be had. I would say that for me, though, there's a hard...
Shouldn't Kamala Harris, back to you, Bakari, shouldn't Kamala Harris have had, you know, being a former AG, have had an opinion on this when she was asked about it last night?
Well, I mean, I think that welcoming a discussion about it, just as Desmond and I sitting here talking, I mean, even I'm rethinking some of my positions. This is something that is a newer issue. I do not believe, though, that Bernie Sanders' answer, and not just to pick on him, it's anyone who has that position that felons incarcerated should vote. I think that is a hard and fast line, that if you've committed a felony and you're incarcerated right now, serving your time, that you do not have that right to vote. But if you're on probation or parole, we can have that conversation. But I will tell you this, and I think Desmond and I can agree with this, and I hope every candidate agrees with this, that we should make sure that individuals who are returning citizens who have served their time, are no longer on probation, parole, can get the right to vote. That is something we can agree on and work from there.
There you go.
I totally agree with you. I think that we take this one step at a time.
Yeah.
But I also agree with you about Ms. Harris. I believe that her willingness to have further conversation really speaks to the fact that returning citizens, formerly incarcerated and convicted people need to be at the table, at the heart of these discussions with any of these candidates before they even take any kind of position.
Sounds like you got some conversations to have and maybe already changing minds with Bakari. Bakari Sellers, thank you. Desmond Meade, thank you so much for all the work that you do. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you for having this discussion, Brooke.
Yeah, thank you.